Hello, everybody. Welcome to my channel. My name is Margaret Pennard. I'm an author and a host of May of the Moderns in this year 2023. So today I'm going to be doing a live stream where we do a little lit discussion. And so I donned my blazer. Hopefully that will give a good impression and get into some of the things I've heard discussed in previous readathons, as well as last Friday in a question that I asked. So I got some interesting answers and I'd like to expand upon them here today. So first, just want to say welcome. Thanks everyone who's come by, whether it's now or on the replay. Um, I'm a historical fiction and fantasy author. So part of the reason I get into reading vintage and classic books is because it's great research. So that's something that I talk about on my channel quite a lot. So if you're interested in that, periods of history, Victorian especially, hit that subscribe button and we'll see what we can do. So what I wanted to get into today was, first of all, the comments about a quintessential modern character as defined by this era of 1901 to 1945. And go through some of the answers I got from my lovely watchers, viewers on last Friday, because I had a little productivity sprint reading corner, and then go into some of the style things that I see in modern lit books, and then just like general impressions. So, like, start on a specific character question, back up to um, style and devices, and then way back up to impressions and sort of throw some examples in if people are curious. So just as a reminder, we have a playlist for May of the Moderns this year and last year. We have a challenge, reading challenge on Storygraph if you want to see other people's books that they're reading for the readathon. And we have recommendations if you want to buy them from bookshop.org, and they should all be linked down in the description below. So if you're curious about last year's thematic talks, I'll pop that in the chat right now, because I actually organized that readathon to do collaborations with people where I was talking about those specific themes that I thought they might have a better point of view on. So that right there is the bit.ly for last year's playlist of videos. And the themes that we covered, to whet your appetite, were sex, war, race and class, and empire, and then independence, other self-realization. That's what I'm calling it now, because that's what I'm going to talk about today. It was good. It was a good time. And wow, I had lovely collaborators from other channels. So let me check in with the chat to say hello to the beautiful people who come to say hi to me. Dreaming Truth author, hello. AF Stewart, hey Anita, how you doing? RC Scott, halo or hallo. Yes, business, Lady Blazer. I'm glad the message got communicated. RK Stumbling Bear is here. Good afternoon. Hello, Rachel. D Blair Gold, hi. Hey, nice to see you. Annalise, hi. Oh, and I love the thumbnail. That reminds me of a William Morris illustration. Just beautiful. So happy to have you all here. Okay, let's dive into the answers. The first one that I have, let me just say thank you to all the people who came. Maggie, Eva, Jocelyn, and Emma. So let's take Maggie's comment first here. Pen number mine, Word. She answered the question and said, I always think of moderns as women ahead of their time in the 1920s and 30s. And there's several facets to this, right? So definitely in the term of a modern, or like a bright young thing, this was certainly a slang term in the 20s and 30s that referred to a woman who was fashion forward, into the latest trends, interested in maybe the suffragette cause, etc. And so, yes, so that's what her mind immediately went to. And this is what my response immediately was, right? So I was thinking, okay, ahead of their time, is that only because they're the hero of their own story? They're getting their own book, right? do people, taking it out of the slang term context, like when you think of a modern, is it just because they're the center of attention, so they look like they're the most active against a static background, or is there something else going on in this case? Um, an alternate explanation is it just because they're not fitting in with the group until the resolution of the novel? I'm mostly talking novels here. Um, for example, ahead of their time and misunderstood until they find like-minded campaigners for the suffragette cause and they join in, and then they feel accepted, so the conflict is resolved, but they're still like holding to the ideals of the age. So that was another like possibility I was thinking of. Or third one, is it simply more relatable to us from our position? So looking back 100 years in history, do we see, oh, they were ahead of their time, or ugly ducklings? Like, they're not pariahs, they're not miscreants. They were campaigning for causes that we idealize as well. Uh, and we can see that with the benefit of hindsight, but in the press or in the times that they were living in, they didn't fit in, and so they got maybe a moniker like ahead of their times or outside of the general public. So I was thinking about that. Not too deeply, but like my mind goes in multiple directions at once. So if any of those make sense to you, let me know. Or if you have a different interpretation of like a modern woman, because that's a very interesting discussion. And again, not like modern now, but modern between 1900 to 1945-ish. I'd be very curious to have you answer that in the comments. So that was Maggie's answer, which is lovely, thought-provoking. And then just Eva came up with the answer Katniss Everdeen, and I was like, well, she's not from the time period, DQ. And then she showed her work and said, I thought, key version of a character that represents the modern day. Because Katniss was a strong woman that maintained her compassion against the tyrants. She showed her work, right? And this made me definitely more interested in the twist, right? So if it's maintaining compassion, which is often seen as a feminine virtue against the tyrants, and that is a very common antagonist in modern novels. Tyrants and governments out to get you, and the gray man and the G-man, whatever, because of communism and the revolutions that were happening. Then it becomes a little more interesting because I'm sure I haven't any titles to throw at you. If you do, put them in the comments. But the holding on to your compassion, your humaneness, your tenderness in the face of tyrants who are trying to control from above and hoard power and exercise it over individuals, like that, it's fantastic. But I feel like it's also specifically modern because of all the world changes that were happening. And I'll get back to that when I get like zoom out a bit more in the discussion. But I thought this was so great. So thank you, Eva, for the Katniss contribution. Okay, and here's another really great answer. So Jocelyn Carter, thank you for coming. The quintessential character for me is the anti-hero. Oh, I'm sorry. I mistyped it. The anti-hero. And for those of us who haven't had a literature course in, I don't know, decades, an anti-hero is someone who doesn't fit the typical or traditional image of hero who conquers or wins the battle or wins the love of the lady or ends up very successful and wealthy, right? So and likable. That's a key thing. So this made me very curious, and I started going to find quotes, right? So, oh, and I already skipped a thing because I got too excited. Let me hop back to Eva's comment because I started collecting quotes to sort of support some of my answers here. And this is one I found from theconversation.com. This is someone talking about modern novels. I was just sort of doing some searching. And let's see. Conversation, a little excerpt here. Female characters engaged with the world of work as well as matters of the heart, battling for self-determination. The eponymous heroine of Muriel Sparks, the prima Miss Jean Brodie, is one example, setting out to impose her will on her impressionable students. So this is not compassion against tyrants, but it is a strong woman character. Um, So I would love someone to tell me an example that fits Eva's definition of the compassion and tenderness in the midst of war and dislocation and, the attempted tyrants. Um, but that's what they brought up, and I'll put the link in here in case anyone is enough of a dork to want to like read the sources like I would. There you go. And this made me think of High Wages. If anyone was with us, I think 2 years ago, Katya Weinert and I buddy read High Wages by Dorothy Whipple, my first Dorothy Whipple. And that is definitely a strong woman. She doesn't start out strong, but she becomes strong. She's engaging in the world of work, the highly fascinating world of drapery, as well as matters of the heart. And I remember there's more success in one arena than another. And so I do like playing with this strong female character trope and like twisting it one way and another to look at it. So just wanted to put that in there for Eva's comment. All right, back to the anti-hero thing. So for people who have not been in a literature class for a long time, the anti-hero is someone who is not likable, not typically expected to be the hero in the tale, right? So who are some good anti-heroes in modern novels? Well, the first one I found during my little search was one who no one is reading this year, I don't think, and that is Gone with the Wind, Scarlett O'Hara. So this is from Tea and Ink Society, on one of their articles on anti-heroines. Scarlett O'Hara is intelligent, endlessly resourceful, and fiercely loyal to her family home. Hero qualities. She's also cruel, selfish, and vain. So we get to see her other side that makes her not so likable and not so admirable, right? Not so heroic. So I thought that was an interesting example. We've also got Nick Gatsby in The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. He is an entrepreneur and bootlegger, infatuated with Daisy, a young woman who will never love him. Born James Gatz, he builds an elaborate identity that's nothing but a facade. It was published in the middle of the Roaring '20s and not immediately successful, but after the Great Depression, Gatsby came to epitomize the excess of the jazz age and the myths of the American dream and the self-made man. So I thought that was interesting in terms of a modern anti-hero because about a facade. So, like, is the heroism in that anti-hero of Jay Gatsby, sorry, not Nick, Jay Gatsby, is it the fact that he builds up the facade and seeming riches to people so that outwardly he seems successful? Or is it that he has conquered something in himself towards the end? Um, yeah, interesting. Something that someone is reading in the readathon this year is Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man by James Joyce, 1916, and that character is Stephen Dedalus. So if anyone is reading Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man and has thoughts about the anti-hero twist, let me know. I have not read that book. I've read The Dubliners, but I haven't read this one, so I don't know about the anti-hero. We've got Quentin Compson and The Sound and the Fury by William Faulkner, 1929. These are from Wikipedia now. They don't have quotes. They're just examples to throw out there to give you anti-hero thoughts. I read The Sound and the Fury under duress in high school, so I don't remember much of it, but I believe Quentin might be the one that is dealing with life with a mental disability. So I'm not sure if that's the character that they're referring to. Honestly, long time ago. We've got Sam Spade in The Maltese Falcon by Dashiell Hammett in 1930. Not sure why that qualifies. Is it maybe because he's like grim and not dashing and like, I don't know, down in the weeds? Because that's very appealing to people today, right? Pinky Brown from Brighton Rock by Graham Greene, 1938. Don't know that one. Bigger Thomas from Native Son by Richard Wright, 1940. That is on my list, but it's not, I don't have a copy yet, so it's not going to happen this year. Of course, there's Meursault from L'étranger by Albert Camus, 1942. So that one I have read. I read it for French, also in college a long time ago. But I've heard people talk about it here on BookTube, so it's a little fresher in my memory. And anti-hero because he's so morally ambiguous, right? You don't know how to take him in the first person. Is he serious? Is he dissociating? Does he think that's right? Is he playing a long game? There's some interesting stuff going on there, but engaging. And then we've got Bob Jones, the character in If He Hollers, Let Him Go by Chester Himes, 1945. So, I mean, I only know like one or two of those. So that makes it difficult to pass judgments. But if you know some, tell me, do you see differences in the modern era anti-heroes from today's anti-heroes? Because maybe you are more familiar with it and you see them in today's rom-coms or situation comedies or dramas even. Although if you start out like the scientist nerd in an alien invasion novel and then end up like saving the day by stopping a missile or something, I would say that's pretty heroic. I wouldn't say that's an anti-hero. I would say that's a growth arc for the character. But, you know, if you think I'm wrong, let me know. And leave an answer in the comments. And then our final comment after this anti-hero bit is from Emma Bennett. Her answer for modern character was Jo March, which is from Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. Oh my God, I almost said Gaskell. Louisa May Alcott in 1868, and she said probably slips into modern, and she's my quintessential character. So I looked up the year and put the year in there. So 1868 is still like a long way off. It's still 30 plus years off. So do we think Jo March is ahead of her time? Kind of getting back to what Mama Maggie was saying? Or what? What do we think about this era? Is it more fluid than I want it to be? Is it like, or was Louisa May Alcott as an American more flexible with independence themes? Like how do you think that is playing with the structure here? One of the things I looked up researching was not very convincing, so I'm not going to quote it, but it was talking about how in Victorian heroes and heroines, the focus was more on the emancipation of women, but still in the marriage sort of predictable winning scenario. Whereas in the modern age, it's more focused on the economic independence of women. And I thought, well, they're very interrelated, right? And you do have Jo March like going off to earn money as a writer, and that being a pretty central theme. So again, that means like 30 plus years, just sort of like a snap, you know? What do you think? So you will remember that when I said the themes that I had last year, I had an other category, right? And so I think instead of economic independence, even though women still struggle with that today, I think what modern women characters are really grasping for is self-realization. And, you know, modern heroines and heroes and characters in general. My impression, and I'm getting a little ahead of myself here, my impression is that the effects of the Industrial Revolution, this is my theory, the effects of the Industrial Revolution and the world wars and the like wholesale killing and revolutions that were released into the world. All this upheaval in this very short sort of generation or two time period left people feeling out of control and sort of powerless to direct their own futures. Because even previously, when you had a firmer class structure or like even a feudal social structure, you knew what to expect and life was more predictable. Whereas this modern era, everything just seems turned upside down. And not only can you not control your own destiny, but you also don't know what to expect. Like there could be a new thing that's going to like hurl you off your feet. So in literature, I think that my biggest impression is like grappling with this enormity of unpredictability and trying to do the most for self-realization that you can within that context. So what do you think? So yeah, so those are the 4 comments that I pulled out from Friday's talk, which was great. And let me pop that down. I guess I did still have this question if I want to leave that up in case people want to answer. Let me hit the chat again to say hello to anyone who came in. Hi, Richard. Richard, fresh off the cathedral visit for the coronation. Nice to see you're still here. You haven't been suffocated in the crowds. Victoria talks writing. Hello, hello. Nice to see you. Jim's books, reading and stuff. Hello from Georgia. And yes, Victor Frankenstein. I think definitely an anti-hero, but also definitely Victorian. Yeah, I think. Unless he's like on the cusp of the early part of the Victorian era. Just a villain. I don't know. I'd have sympathy for him. I'd say he's an anti-hero. Dark character we follow. No. Anti-hero. My definition, working definition, is going to be someone who is the protagonist, but who is not the typical traditional hero in qualities such as being likable, being dashing, being above board, being winning at the end, and amassing wealth and privilege and love and all the prizes and trappings that society values by the end. So. Hey, JC. Author JC Carpenter, welcome. Oh, thank you, Jim. Okay, I think it's on the cusp. It's right before Victorian. Thank you. Mary Shelley was very young, and I don't think she lived very long. So, like, yeah, that wasn't what I could pull out of my ear in short order. But yeah, maybe Jim will even get us the date because it's going to be close. Is it 1837 or before? From Regency era. Oh, okay, well, now I'm going to have to go look. (1818) Frankenstein or the modern Prometheus. Thank you. Okay. So dealt with some like modern character things. Feel free to answer this question if you're just coming in and finding your seat. But then I wanted to launch into the second part of this, which is style considerations, because style is often what affects whether or not you enjoy reading a book, right? And the modern era, I feel, is not as united in styles as previous eras. So it could be like the first thing you read in classics or in school that you're like, what the heck? This is so weird. I don't get it. It's completely understandable. Oh, definitely before 1837 then. Thank you. 1831 revision. Gotcha. Okay. I need a noir detective like Philip Marlowe might for the anti-hero trope. Philip Marlowe. Remind me, is that an author name or a character name? I'm not deep into the noir, so forgive me for not knowing. But style. Okay, so the things that I listed for style, what comes to mind for me for style writing, modern lit, is like experimental, right? So you get, I don't know, Ulysses in 1922, which is a car wreck of a manuscript. You get episodic, which I'm excited to read The Underdogs by Mariano Azuela. It's about the Mexican Revolution, and I dipped into the introduction just to sort of mine the trenches, mine the field. Nope, that doesn't work either. Anyway, find some information. And the people writing the introduction were mentioning the fact that it's episodic and it almost feels like a mural, like an artist doing murals rather than a plot. But he does have the revolution as the backdrop and the life of one person in particular who is considered the protagonist. And I was like, okay, but episodic. So flashes instead of a plot that you meticulously craft and follow a single storyline with. Shocking. Definitely definitely come across that evaluation during the period, for example, with like the sex stuff that starts coming out with women writers and experiences and liberation and all that. Shocking also in terms of violence and war. That was one of the main themes in William an Englishman by Cecily Beaton, that I read last year, which is a Persephone book. It was the first Persephone book, actually. So if anyone doesn't know, Persephone is a publisher based in Bath, England. Bath. I got to commit to it. Otherwise, it just sounds weird. Bath, England. And they mostly reprint books by underappreciated, overlooked late 19th and early 20th century women writers. And so it's like a perfect marriage with this readathon. But that was their first book that they ever reprinted. And William an Englishman is about a couple that's sort of silly. They got married very quickly. They're moderns. They're bright young things. They go off to France or somewhere for a honeymoon and don't realize that like this war thing is actually a big deal. And they watch soldiers swarm around the hill where they're on a hike one day and go, "Oh, I guess this war thing is getting close." And then they go down and then all of a sudden like someone is executed in front of them. They're like, the horror, like the shockingness of reading that as their characters is pretty hard hitting. But then you've also got subtle in this period, right? So if you read An Enchanted April, like the humor and like the little witty banter that you find in a lot of these like more domestic or social humor novels, like it's exquisite. I love the subtle humor. So like the style gets much more fragmented in my view, according to the Victorian novels and not Victorian, but 19th century novels that I've read. So that gets really interesting. Some of them you can not appreciate as much as others, but then you just gravitate toward the others. And I've got some quotes on like style stuff, including some of the books that I'm reading and some of the books that are on the list that I haven't started yet. So I'll get into those just a minute. Okay, thank you. So Raymond Chandler's main detective character is named Philip Marlowe, and he might qualify for the anti-hero. Have you read the Sam Spade mysteries by Dashiell Hammett enough to like let me know if my guess was right as to why they're listed as an anti-hero? I don't think they would really be called that in today's media. So I'm curious about that. The noir space that just came into being during the modern period. Yes, thank you. Jim is also helping me out here. Jim is reading Orlando because it's both Trans Girl April and taking him into May of the Moderns to read. Nice. Both. Okay, so the first one, this is from Frank O'Connor's short stories. This is one I got from the library called The Best of Frank O'Connor. And I'll let you know that Frank O'Connor is on my list his name only came up because I read him in a book of short stories for the Irish readathon. So thank you, everyone in the Irish readathon. Now I know another name for a modern. And Lisa in Bookland was especially helpful. She, I think, mentioned Guests of the Nation, or it was mentioned in the book that I read. And it's a very famous short story, but the way that it was alluded to made me think that I would really enjoy it. But it wasn't about what I thought it was about, and it's a war story, so I wasn't expecting that. But anyway, so I've just read a couple. I just read the first couple because they start out with war, and that's not my favorite. I may skip to the next section now that I've read a couple of the war stories. But Guest of the Nation actually made me think of a previous read from May of the Moderns. So I read The Marrow of Tradition. That is by Charles Chestnut, who is an African American, and it was published at the very beginning of this period, 1901. And it's about an actual race riot that happened in North Carolina, like the year before he wrote it. So too soon, probably. But he was a very respected writer who made it very real and personable and like family relations. It wasn't journalistic at all. It was very not soap opera-y, but like you saw the personal interchanges and the backstory of these characters that he'd made up to stand in for people he probably knew. And so what happened was you had a small town, and the newspaper was fomenting trouble, and the white folks were going to start harassing and launching attacks at black folks in the town, and just to try to scare them because they were like getting above their position or whatever, and they wanted to make sure that they didn't feel empowered at all. And so in the thick of this, I think someone is very ill and a doctor is sent. The doctor can't do anything for this white person who is very ill. And then they find a black doctor who is safe from being attacked, but like at risk, I mean. And the question is whether he will go to help this white person when all this is happening. And like, oh, that moment, right? So Guest of the Nation is about the same thing. These people who have grown up with each other, maybe hating, maybe having a friend here or there, but like there are clear lines of I'm on this side, you're on that side. And in Marrow of Tradition, it was skin color. In Guests of the Nation, it is Irish or English. So that takes place during the Irish Civil War. There's a camp of militants on the Irish side, and they receive 2 prisoners of war from the British Army, and find out that they're going to have to shoot them because it's like a opposite of a prisoner exchange. They shot 2 of theirs, so they're going to retaliate by shooting 2 of them. Problem is they didn't know that when they started guarding them, and so they've sort of become friends, and now they're like, well, what stands in the way of me shooting you? What's our humaneness, and what's our lofty goals of independence and self-determination? Super good. Super good. So yeah. Rachel says, haven't read Hammett's Sam Spade, but I like The Thin Man by him. Very good. Not a big fan of Sam Spade, but he could be an anti-hero as he's morally ambiguous, but more or less does the right thing. Okay. I put Arsène Lupin. So Maurice Leblanc is the author, and it's the Arsène Lupin mysteries in the Storygraph Challenge, because he is an anti-hero. He's listed as an anti-hero because he's a thief, a master thief. He's like a Sherlock Holmes who does all the mind games and logical deductions and predicts what's going to happen based on like people's predilections, but he's a thief. And he's sometimes working for the side of good because sometimes the law is not on the side of good, you see? So, yeah, to like a Robin Hood. I guess you would call Robin Hood a regular hero because of the way he's presented. But if you're a different person and it was portrayed differently, Robin Hood would not be a hero. What do you think of that? Okay, so I started talking about the Irish readathon and they got distracted. So Frank O'Connor, in the introduction, which is by Julian Barnes, who's a famous author himself, he says, in its general and necessary attack on social realism, modernism inflicted major damage on the notion of the writer's voice. Modernism fragmented and ironized it, like made it ironic, I'm guessing, made it unreliable and shifty. And I thought that was a really interesting acknowledgement because already in the introduction to The Underdogs, we've got the writer's voice is treating two storylines, one that is the actual one, which says less, and one which is the background one about the revolution, which says a lot more. But what's the writer's voice? And then we've got the war stories that I've read in here, which are very intriguing on this point, because usually when I think of writer's voice, and picking it apart from the character point of view, you think of the end resolution and what it says about the character to sort of mathematically deduce what the writer thinks would have been right in the situation. Maybe people do this different ways. But like if in Guests of the Nation, if the person who was a soldier had refused to shoot the prisoner of war because he's a friend now, like just let him run off. I'm not going to shoot this person because he's a human being and this is just chess. I don't want to do something just because it's a duty. What is the writer's voice saying? Is he saying that's what he thinks is right? Is he saying war is absurd and we shouldn't be engaging in it in any circumstances? If the character was, if we had Donovan's character, who's the overseeing lieutenant or whatever, who gets the orders, who knows what they're destined for, and he's the one who refuses, like, then what's the writer saying? Like, it's very interesting. I think that my earlier theory about things being too overwhelming and too unpredictable may be wrapped up in this piece. Modernism fragmented and ironized the writer's voice. So fragmented in style maybe, and made it ironic because you couldn't be tender, compassionate, earnest. That's way too Victorian, which is maybe why I like those books. So very interesting, and very interested in Frank O'Connor. I actually had to ping Brian of the channel Bookish Texan, because we had talked about the war theme earlier, and when I opened it up and saw the first ones were war themed, and I went, we could have read him. That would have been really interesting. But yeah. Okay, so the next quote that I was finding about style of the moderns concerning a book that I will be reading is one that I just got from the library yesterday. It's by Eileen Chang, and it's Love in a Fallen City, translated by Karen Kingsbury. And I think that it's going to be short stories. Jasmine T. I think there's like 4 novellas or short stories, longer short stories. And this looked really interesting. So the quote about the style, or the quote evaluating in the introduction this work, was by the translator Karen Kingsbury. And she says, Chang's great achievement was to meld the language of Qing Dynasty vernacular fiction with the ironic, worldly stance of Edwardian British writers, exploring middle-class mentalities with an artist's compassionate detachment. I thought that was interesting. So we're more familiar as English speakers with Edwardian comic irony, all that kind of tone in books. We've got P.G. Wodehouse. We've got, I don't know, a plethora of books, right, that we know fit this this mode. But combining it with Qing Dynasty vernacular fiction, that sounds really cool, right? So again, haven't read this, but the style would indicate that it's going to be clever and detached and a little bit hidden. Like the writer's voice is going to be a little bit hidden, which is fine. Yeah, ironic. Eileen Chang is someone who was writing this during World War II in Japan occupied Hong Kong. And then she moved to Shanghai for a while, and then she had to leave Shanghai and then spent the rest of her life in the US. So pretty interesting. And I'm very curious. She's enjoyed a bit of a renaissance, and hopefully I make it to that. I'm moving really slow. I need to get going, but I'm reading so many other books, not for May of the Moderns, that this might be an issue. All right, let me catch up with the chat. Jim says, Arsène Lupin was a classic gentleman thief, like Raffles by E.W. Hornung. I've heard of Raffles, but you know what it makes me think of? A hotel. Why are they both the same name? Tell me that. Extra points in the comments if anyone knows why. I love that word, plethora. Oh, thank you, Richard. Pop-up. Yes. Yes, and I'm trying out my new times, 12:30 instead of 11, so hopefully later does better for people. Okay, so we've gotten through Frank O'Connor style stuff, Eileen Chang style stuff, just suggestions really. Haven't read them in any detail yet, so just like setting the scene and trying to get people thinking. The next one, I've got two more. The next one is Richard's favorite, actually, of my pile of possibilities. It's The Road to Wigan Pier by George Orwell, 1937. This is the copy that I have, a Penguin classic. And here's what it says in Richard Hoggart's introduction. It's about a struggle towards a liberation from the constrictions of class, seeking a communal, undivided England. So the introduction details how George Orwell, 1984 fame, this is a nonfiction, swings from anger at the injustice and the plight of the poor working class of Northern England, and the tenderness towards identifying with people who were so underprivileged and badly serviced by their government/community, right? So it swings back and forth between criticism and compassion, and he does some interesting things with language. So this also sounds really good. I've already said there's too many books that I want to read, but the style. Okay, so a struggle towards a liberation, and again, that gets back to what I was talking about, self-realization. But let me point out one thing that he said about the language. Okay, not the sense of smell. He does talk about smells a lot. Here we go. Whatever the intellectual interest of his ideas and opinions, much the most fruitful and enjoyable way into an understanding of Orwell is through his handling of language. Through the sloppinesses first, since they indicate almost as much about the temper of his mind as do the strengths. He loves extreme adjectives, adverbs, and nouns, and does not mind how often he repeats them. Redundancy is one of his stylistic tactics. Top of the list is dreadful, closely followed by frightful, then appalling, disgusting, hideous, then unspeakably, horribly, obscenely, and finally, horror. They are idiomatic and they hammer at you. And he goes on to give another few points of getting people intimate in the scene with like you, using the second person, and just being really forceful and plain and ordinary with his language. And so this is one of the few nonfiction on the list. Most of my May of the Moderns recommendations are fiction, but I'm again like I want to read it all, and it's already May 7th. So yeah, stylistic choices in nonfiction might be less useful to consider, but George Orwell is a fiction writer, so maybe you could take those to his other. Why is something sticking up here? It's like a plant. Take it to his other work and see like the modernness of it all. So those are just some thoughts on the style in case anyone's going through and like trying to make notes or putting sticky notes and tabs in their books like a good book nerd. Yeah. But I don't think I've gotten any answers to this question, so I'll just take it down. And there's the second question. What's your favorite signature modern writing style or device? Is it comic irony? Is it the shock and the horror? Is it the, domestic scenes of those Persephone books that are highlighting the changes and self-realization? Like what jumps out at you, or what is a small slice that you've discovered already maybe that you really appreciate about modern writing styles? Let me know in the chat or in the comments. Either way, I'd love to hear it. Hey, Shannon. Welcome to the chat. Richard says we're talking proper literature today. Yes. Sticky notes and tabs, notes in the margin, no. Comic irony. Writing style. Comic Sans would be writing font. Yeah. No. So I was looking through. Oh, I think I forgot to did I put in the link to 2022? Okay. If I didn't, I'll just put it in again. So last year's playlist has the videos with the different themes that we talked about. And, there's a year before that as well where we did a lot of great buddy reads and talked about things. So the last section of this video is me like throwing those big theories at you, right? So the big theory, past the characters, past the writing style, is that the modern era was just so much upheaval that the writing reflects both the loss of control and the desperate desire for self-realization amongst this unpredictability, right? So I was looking back at some of the buddy reads that we did, and I come across The Octopus and think about it fondly. This is an American book from the early 20th century by Frank Norris, and I buddy read it with Barrett Laurie, and he gave me guff the whole time because it was a sprawling novel in the not quite Dickensian fashion, but very, very flowery. And the impressions and words that it brings up in me in recalling reading that book are grappling, right? Like really engaged with something that is putting you to the test. Complexity. So, well, let me do the words first, and then I'll explain a little bit about the plot. Complexity, modern era. Bewilderment. What am I supposed to do? And struggle. Just like everything in life is a struggle. So, the main characters are on a ranch in California, and they're grappling with changes to their economic situation, what they grow, how they get it to market, what price they get, how that helps them keep the farm. Complexity comes in when the conflict is introduced and they have to figure out how to adapt their model to still cope, right? Is there a way that they can adapt and still keep their home and the people who depend on them, etc.? It sounds a lot like the Keening for some reason. Then, like, bewilderment is just realizing that things in the modern era, the consequences of the Industrial Revolution and the economic changes, have made the disconnect between people so wide, so vast, that there is no compassion, there is no understanding, there is no, oh, well, the logical way to work this out is this. It's, I have the power, you don't, do what I tell you, and that's the end of the discussion because we're in the Gilded Age here. And then finally struggle, and that's just like the ending of most of these like labor movement books, is concluding that that's the noblest form of carrying on, is just struggling against this inevitable change in society that we don't know how eventually it will end up. But like as humans, as one in a world of many, like all we can do is struggle to maintain our ideals and realize ourselves. And like that's mainly what I get from these books. And it was a slog, but the octopus did a great job at, sketching exactly those themes for me. So well done, Frank Norris. I've already mentioned William and Englishman, the Persephone book #1, and that for me illustrates the inescapable shock and horror in general. I came across this phrase, inescapable shock, when I was reading psychology, actually, this book, which I'm sure a lot of BookTube has seen, The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, MD. Inescapable shock is what forms trauma, because if you have shock or threat or danger, humans fight or fly or freeze or whatever, or dissociate. But if you can't escape it, you dissociate. If you can't escape it, you develop certain tendencies or after effects or symptoms, I guess, PTSD. That's what he's studying in that book. But that's what I was connecting to moderns, because like the whole world feels like this sometimes in the literature that we read from that period, which is interesting. Diffuse trauma. I don't know. Is that a thing? Has anyone discovered that yet? And I did already jump ahead and mention The Marrow of Tradition by Charles Chestnut. It has like links with Guests of the Nation, and that people who live together for much of their lives and are very closely interwoven, but perceive themselves on other sides, have to grapple with the humanity of that. And, when they're put to the test, what is their decision of how to treat the other? So, so good. So good. And then the last little example I had was All Passion Spent by Vita Sackville-West. I read this one and really enjoyed it because it was like quiet, domestic, and yet very firm in its message of self-determination. Most people say they compare it to A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf, which is nonfiction, but this is fiction. And I can see similarities in terms of function, but very different in terms of literature, obviously. It's an older woman who retires after her widowhood to her own house and doesn't allow her children to visit. And strikes up an acquaintance with someone she knew a long time ago, and just does some strange things. And the point of view that you get for these things is comic, but also you sort of follow her development finally when she's a widow and her fascinating conclusion. So I really, really liked that book, and I think it's a very modern situation to be in. So All Passion Spent, definitely recommend. Oh, I'm learning from you, Melissa. It's a pop-up. It's pop-up because it's just a little later than I usually do, and I didn't have time to make a thumbnail. I'll make one afterwards because I wasn't sure the direction, and I wanted to research it really well before I tried to make a visual representation. Oh, thank you. Yes, the blazer was donned for the academic veneer, and the earrings are actually, they're not, what is it called? I can't remember, but they're from Australia. I have a friend of my mom, something opals. They're not opals, but they're like a specific Australian mineral. So anyway, very pretty, but also very heavy. So I don't wear them very often. Annalise says, seeing the just discovered quantum mechanics reflected in literature of the early 20th century is such a treasure. Like in To the Lighthouse by Woolf, you see the idea of particles and waves. Yes. Okay, so one of the things I tried to look in and pull something out of was To the Lighthouse, right? It's on my second pile of possibilities here. And they said water and waves, and conduction through waves is a theme, but I like that you're bringing in science. And now I will probably read it with that in mind. So it's very cool. Very, very neat. Okay. So those are the three main pieces of today. We talked about May of the Moderns character traits, May of the Moderns stylistic possibilities, and then like overall impressions for the period after 3 years of reading modern novels. So this is like culmination time, folks. This is really cool. I'm very appreciative of the time I've had to read this section of literature and try to learn from it and involve and pull people in from booktube to learn with me. So part of what I love. Current May of the Moderns reads, as I said, I've got Tin Flute, the French Canadian worker down on his luck and war going on tale, proceeding well. And the Frank O'Connor, like I said, I'll probably skip the war and go into a different category to keep going with some of his short stories. But I have got a lot more to move on, don't I? Very excited to keep going with May of the Moderns. And if you are participating by even reading one book that is written or translated or published in this time period, any of the three, drop us a line and we'll include you in the playlist so that everyone can see everyone who is participating, which just makes it more fun, I think. So the readathon on Storygraph, the challenge is in the description, the link. The playlist link is in the description, and the recommendations, most of which I've discussed on this live stream, are also available on bookshop.org from one of my little curated lists. And if you buy a book from there, it like helps me a little bit because I get a little commission. I get some pennies. So much appreciated. Coming up, it is Sunday. So next I will have any books that I've finished on Wednesday to report back with my book reviews. And then Friday, I think we'll do another reading corner, a little quiet reading corner. So, I'll just remind you, I do have prompts in case any of you are super ambitious. These are the prompts. They're on the Storygraph challenge just to help people sort of branch out a little from the main classics that come to mind. But if you don't see any that come to mind or you don't see any recommendations that you have on your shelf, don't worry about it. It's cool. Just read a book and join in, and you'll be part of the team for May of the Moderns. So that's really all I have for you today, and I will wish you happy reading. Sunday still means plenty of time for reading on the weekend, so go to. Thanks for coming, everybody. Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe, like if you haven't already, and I will see you again soon.